let's talk a little bit about this chapter. This is a really important chapter the in the book. It is a it's kind of a bridge that gets us from really what you would have covered if you took the first part of this class and getting into the modern world, which is where we're headed. So, chapter 16 is kind of this bridge, and it's exploration. It's all about exploration. The book is kind of broken down into taking a look at the old world and taking a look at exploration and taking a look at some of the consequences of exploration. So basically, the chapter opens up talking about essentially the old world, which they call the Afro-Eurasian world or the Afro-Eurasian trade world. The If you read this part of the text, okay, it's talking a little bit about, especially about China and how China has been taking the lead in exploration. It has sent out all sorts of expeditions. It has gone out and started looking for other places to talk about. Okay, so Chinese exploration is a little bit of the first part of this chapter. You've talked a little bit. It also talks a little bit about India as well. So you're getting kind of an introduction to Indian Ocean trade and how eventually Europe's going to get involved in that as well. So you get a little bit of what culture is like in those areas. Okay. The uh, the next kind of deals a little bit with trade in Africa. You get a little bit, and this is the area that we're talking about here. So you're talking about Africa and about India and about China. So if you get in there, you talk about a little bit about trade with Africa and the Middle East. You get an introduction to West African gold that's making its way back into Europe, transported basically out of the Kingdom of Mali and across the Sahara on camels, gold sold in North African ports. It's also some of the first contact we have with African slavery. And slaves, of course, are going to become another commodity that's going to be traded on a global scale. The entire world practiced slavery, including the kingdoms within Africa. So, but of course, the exportation of Africans in wholesale numbers is going to come as a result of European exploration and contact with the New World as well. So you're going to get a little bit about that, and you're also going to get a little bit of an introduction to the Safavid Empire and the Ottoman Empire in this section, and of course we'll be covering them more in depth in the next chapter, in chapter 17. So after reading about that and kind of getting yourself familiar with the beginnings of what's going on, you get into this section about Genoa and Venice. And that's important too, because if you know a little bit about Columbus and Columbus's exploration for Spain, Columbus is Genoese. He's from Genoa. The Italians are one of the first real European kingdoms to benefit a lot from trade, especially during the Crusades and after. So if you don't know anything a little bit about the Crusades, go back in your textbook a little bit or just Google the Crusades and read a little bit in the Wikipedia about the Crusades. And when these European places like Italy and like the Italian sailors make their way into the Middle East, they start getting intrigued by all of these trade goods that are there that they don't have in Europe, and they want to get those back. So you'll get a little bit of introduction to the Italians. The Italian trade was so lucrative in the Mediterranean world that this is where the Renaissance started. The This is where art, culture, and all of these things began to develop because there was so much money in Italy. And artists like Michelangelo or Raphael or Donatello or Leonardo da Vinci were in such high demand in Italy for art, for culture, because there was money there from trade. Okay, then the textbook shifts a little bit to taking a look more in depth at Europe and why Europe begins to go out and explore. And they will talk about several causes, and they run the gamut, okay, of why the Europeans start to look outside of Europe for exploration. In some cases, it is an increase in population that led to a demand for all sorts of new goods, not just luxury goods, but all sorts of new goods as well. One of the biggest and most profitable things that will come out of India, for example, is something really simple: pepper. Okay, it makes your food taste good. So there are things that the Europeans really want and need to get their hands on. And if they can do so, they can make a lot of money. The uh, the Ottoman Empire, which I told you we'll learn a little bit more about in our next chapter, controlled Constantinople. So a lot of the Europeans were cut off from trade with the Middle East and therefore needed to get around Africa to get into the Far East. They're going to have to take totally new trade routes. Religious fervor, constant lack of opportunity in Europe. There's no land available. There's no way to get rich or get land in Europe. So some people are going to look for adventure. They're going to look for ways to make themselves wealthy. And what better way to go out and maybe get in some area and I guess think about this. If I can't do anything in Spain, I don't have any land in Spain. But if I go somewhere else on the globe, then maybe I can get a farm. Maybe I can have my own lands. Maybe I can become wealthy. So the thing is one of the things that the Europeans are going to take advantage of, okay, is as you get through this thing, as you get through this part of the chapter, you're going to see this shift a little bit towards education and technology. The Europeans are going to push the envelope. They're going to use all sorts of new technology, from better ships to better maps to compasses to astrolabes to lateen sails. All of these things you'll read about in this chapter help the Europeans really be able to sail long distances. They know they can't go through the Mediterranean, so they're going to have to sail long distances around Africa to ever get to the Far East, or in Columbus's case, to sail west, believing he can circumnavigate the globe. So all of this technology that you'll see, whether it's brought on by a navigator in Portugal or the where the Portuguese are going to take the lead in all this because they are going to invest so heavily in technology. Was the kind of the thing that's going to allow the Portuguese to take a lead, to sail around the African coast, and eventually make it to India. So make sure that you understand how important Prince Henry, the navigator, is to getting Portugal eventually to Asia and to India. So Da Gama's voyage that finally rounds the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and gets to India, very lucrative. Okay, so ships like this is what's going to allow the Europeans to do these things. Tools like the astrolabe here that you see. Okay, so while you've got the Portuguese moving south here around Africa, Columbus is going to propose to the Spanish to sail this way, believing he can circumnavigate the globe and end up over here. And the problem is that of course he's right if he wouldn't have been able to, or if he wouldn't have whacked himself in North and South America. But he's also wrong because he underestimates the size of the globe. So Columbus really believed that he could get there, and he convinces Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492 to fund a voyage that leads to this attempt. Now, you guys realize that he doesn't make it. He ends up whacking himself into San Salvador right here, and he is not, even though he thinks he is, he's not in India, he's not in China, he's not in Asia, he's on a new continent. The Columbus really believed that he had found those islands, and he hasn't. This complicates things for Spain. Okay, they don't, they aren't where they're supposed to be. They don't know anything because this is a totally new continent. And so now they've got to figure out what they have, and it's going to lead to a wave of exploration. The conquistadors are going to come over here. You're going to have Cortez and Pizarro, which you'll read about conquering the Aztec and the Inca, but they're looking for things, whether it be gold, whether it be riches, but they're also trying to find out just what it is they have found here in the New World because they don't know. The they're going to find an area that doesn't hold the riches perhaps that China or that India would have, but there are certain things that the Spanish are going to be able to exploit. One of them will be sugar producing areas. Okay, the uh, the Spanish and the Portuguese take such a lead that you'll read about this line in this chapter, the Treaty of Tordesillas line. The Spanish and the Portuguese will end up really negotiating with the Pope, or the Pope will negotiate for them, essentially sort of telling the Portuguese that you can do everything on this side of the line, and Spain can do everything on this side of the line. So the Treaty of Tordesillas line, you guys can see, sort of divides part of South America, which becomes Brazil and, of course, Portuguese, and this part over here that becomes Spanish. And this is really how the world was divided between the Spanish and the Portuguese. The next sort of segment here, okay, is to talk a little bit about, and there's Columbus's first voyage, by the way, is to talk a little bit about how the Spanish, and you can read about some of these explorers as well, okay? But you'll move into this section about Cortez and the Aztecs, and about Pizarro and the Inca. You can read this stuff for yourself. It's a story that's pretty familiar, probably to a lot of you. And I want you guys to make sure that you understand how Pizarro and Cortez were able to conquer these Native American empires, whether it be the Aztecs in Mexico or the Inca further south in Peru. One is technology. The Europeans had superior technology, and Cortez, even though he has a pretty small force, is able to conquer a great Native American empire in large part because of technology. Pizarro, the same thing as he makes his way towards the Inca. The other thing that results from this, okay, is that what you end up with is the creation of a new world empire. Both Mexico and Peru get wound up into what becomes essentially New Spain. Spain is going to administer this area as really an empire. Viceroys will rule here in the New World in the name of the king in various viceroyalties scattered throughout the New World. Okay, so when you sort of look back over this, you get to see that essentially the Spanish do what we think they would do. Okay, and that is try to administer this area. And the Portuguese are going to do the same thing in trying to administer Brazil as well. So if you cruise over the map, you see that the Spanish authority in the New World was organized into New Spain, Peru, New Granada, La Plata. Okay, the Brazilians will, or excuse me, the Portuguese in Brazil will do the same thing. Now, the next part of the chapter deals with the the exploitation of the Europeans into this area. After they conquer and settle these areas, you're going to see the Columbian Exchange. Okay, this is a huge part and a very important part of this chapter. You have trade routes, you have livestock, you have foods, and you have disease that are going to spread and be exchanged. And one of the big crops that will be exchanged is sugar. Sugar can be grown here. It's going to lead to the need for slavery because it is such a lucrative system. It's also very labor intensive. The Native Americans are dying off because of disease. So African slavery is going to fill that void, and they will be necessary really to make this system lucrative. It's a hugely difficult crop to deal with. Okay, so once you sort of see, then our Eurasian world that we talked about over here is suddenly becoming a much more global world. And Europe, Africa, and North and South America now get welded into a commodities exchange, a trading empire where things are flowing back and forth, whether it be silver or slaves. So essentially, you finish up talking about this as a global economy. And for the first time, really, we start thinking of the world in truly global terms. All right, I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into the chapter. All right, make sure that you concentrate on things like the Columbian Exchange. Those are big things, okay? The slave trade and other things as you go through this chapter, okay? All right, hope that helps. And we'll do the next chapter here pretty soon, all right?